My name's Kevin Hooper. I'm the Social Development and Partnerships Manager with United Way Halifax. I'm the Chair of the Community Advisory Board for Reaching Home Halifax, and I work with the Atlantic Home Building and Renovation Sector Council. I think this conference is a great opportunity to take stock of where we are as a society and, with respect to the economy that we're now operating in. It's very different than it was even 10 years ago, but drastically different from where it was 30 or 40 years ago when we were still operating according to a lot of policies, really kind of post-war era. Things have evolved quite far. I think we're at a point of real inflection related to demographic shift, changes in the structure of the economy. That requires that we all start to think about how we need to approach solutions going forward. Solutions across the board, but that includes housing. I think the solutions are rooted in community input. I think they're rooted in community collaboration. And I don't mean that to sound trite or, kumbaya. I think we've lost our ability and our sense of who we are as a people, as a society. What are we working towards as far as our common future is concerned? I'm a firm believer in flipping the script as it relates to the notion of form follows function. I do think that we have built systems and structures that have led us down a certain path, and we are kind of at the kind of, the kind of end of that path. We really have promoted the idea that people can live independently and pursue kind of independent wealth and kind of opportunity. And quite frankly, those opportunities are drying up. They just aren't what they used to be. And it's a tough pill to swallow, no doubt about it. But I think it's the reality of the situation. But I do think there's opportunity in this. I think, it's time that we come together on a lot of fronts and start talking about what we want that future to look like. Not at that kind of individual level, but at a societal level. And, as far as that kind of form follows function, I would say function follows form just as much. When you create a system of housing, for example, which requires that people live together, work together, plan together, we come to a better point of understanding. We come to a clearer notion of why we are, putting in the work we're putting in, what we are trying to achieve through that. And I just think it's an understanding that's been lost, and we just don't have the basis and the skills to kind of construct a better system to pursue going forward. I do think that there has been this trend over the last few generations that kind of has led us towards a kind of a technocratic understanding of a lot of issues. And that just means that we put solutions in the hands of experts, and more those experts are kind of siloed off, doing the work on their own, trying to solve problems. And that, again, relates to housing and the economy. And they've lost a sense of what the needs really look like and what are some practical responses to those needs. To me, the only way that you get around that challenge is to start incorporating community in the conversation. Start involving community in situations in which they can work through those questions amongst themselves. Really put them in the situation where they have a responsibility for informing decisions that will be made. And, I think there's opportunity to do that kind of at a professional level, consultation and kind of, those community stakeholder engagements that we're used to. But I think more practically I think we'd get better results if we just, pursued some opportunities for people to live closer together, share some responsibilities, share some resources, and start to kind of, sort out how we all kind of work together again to a better future. I don't think that it's incredibly complicated. I think the challenge is that it's very different. It's a very different proposition than what we've all been kind of taught to believe and what we've been taught to pursue. It requires that we consider giving up some of the privilege and some of the beliefs that we've had and really take the opportunity to reevaluate our principles, to reevaluate the values that we want to infuse into those systems, housing, the economy, society in general. And and it's just a matter of time and opportunity. The main project right now for us along these lines is a community land trust project. And fundamentally, that's kind of taking a nonprofit organization and putting it to work for a community as it relates to real estate stewardship interests, right? Taking those land opportunities that are out there in community, taking possession of them from an ownership point of view, but managing them according to community direction. I think within that, you ultimately, get to a place again where you give people the opportunity to have a say in what the use of that land will look like, but you also require that they take responsibility, collective responsibility for the direction and the outcomes of that system. I think it's essential at this point. I just don't know. In fact, I'm quite sure that we can't altogether rely on the private market to solve our problems, which has been the proposition to date, right? The supply and demand notion that if there's a demand out there in the system for housing, the private sector will come along and fill that. It's just proven itself not to be the case, and that is not to say that there's no place for private developers in the private sector in the system. But it does mean that we need a parallel and autonomous system that can go out and pursue the interests of those who can't afford what the private sector is producing. We've talked to private developers, and they're quite clear at this stage to say there's a big portion of the market that they really can't address in their business model. There's no profit to be had, but we can't accept the fact that people who can't pay the bills can't have housing. Our society depends upon people having a place to live, a place to, rest, a place to grow, a place to kind of explore their lives. And if we deny them that, we're all going to suffer. Our economy, our culture, our health and well-being depend on it. I do think that it's essential anytime you're talking about housing to talk about two other issues, and that's environment and social and economic equity. We certainly need to be thinking about how we make use of the resources we have in an effective and a sustainable way. Co-housing, these shared resource kind of approaches, I think are really important from that point of view. When you're talking about building new units, I think it's all the more important that we think about the kind of long-term impacts, the efficiencies of those facilities. So I just don't want that to be lost. I think it's an essential component of our thinking. Any plan that doesn't incorporate a consideration for that issue is a misguided plan. As far as equity is concerned, I think it's just as important. There are certainly more and more people all the time who are being cut out of the economy, cut out of the housing market, and kind of being left with very few options. But there's also populations in the society who have been cut out of both of those arenas, the economy and housing, jobs and otherwise, forever. They just have not kind of been allowed entry into those systems in the same way that many of the rest of us can take for granted. So again, whatever housing solution is out there, I think that needs to consider how it can accommodate and how it can serve the needs of populations who simply have been kind of denied access and restricted the opportunities that housing provides people. I mean, I'm certainly a believer that housing is far more than shelter from the elements. Housing is, pardon the kind of the metaphor here, the pun, but like it's the foundation on which we build our lives. Everything that we accomplish in our life really falls back on having a place to call home, and building the home in the community in a way that suits your purpose and your beliefs. So again, whatever the solution is, it has to kind of maintain some focus, a consideration for all those people who have been denied access to the system over time. And that's a deliberate effort, right? It's thinking that is not embedded in many of us. You know, these are issues that many of us have ignored for a very long time and have a very kind of limited understanding of how to accommodate different needs. So I think that, you know, when we talk about these things, we have to open ourselves up to input from those populations. We have to start contemplating the need for a different approach in a way that is going to kind of get us to a better, more kind of equitable future. Professionally speaking, as far as my other role is concerned with the Atlantic Home Building and Renovation Sector Council, I do think that it's really important to kind of understand the significance of housing construction and labor within this whole equation. It's one of the reasons that I do think that co-housing is as significant a solution as it is, especially right now. We have, again, tens of thousands of households in need of housing. We don't have the labor to build that. We don't have it today, and we're not going to have that tomorrow. It's going to take time to rebuild that industry to the point where we can actually accommodate the need. And so making use of the resources that are out there right now, the homes, the underutilized homes, the vacant space that we have, it's essential. It's the only way that we even come close to meeting the need anytime soon. And so I do think that there's a real opportunity and a need to kind of explore that right now. But I don't think it should be lost on people that there is a need for a rapid growth in tradespeople to build the housing. I think that there's a need to reevaluate what that industry is all about, where I think we've maybe mischaracterized it or underappreciated its value over time. I know when I was growing up, you know, it was a period of time where we were kind of cutting vocational school programming and you know, this idea that everybody was going to end up in a white-collar job, go to university and end up in a white-collar job was just kind of what was promoted. But I think there's real value in people considering trades. I'll just say, for anybody interested, there's a career's worth of opportunity with kind of endless prospects in front of you, right? But I also think it's worth reevaluating from the point of view of purpose. It's really not just about, you know, good pay for hard work. At this point in the game, I think there's an argument to be made as you're doing work that is of a social benefit. There's not much more essential in our society right now than building homes for people. If we don't do that, increasingly we're going to see people struggling to maintain their homes, and we're going to see skyrocketing numbers of homelessness. So yeah, I think it's something for people to think about. There's good money, good work, and solid purpose in getting into home construction. St. Margaret's Bay or otherwise, we live in a society that overindulged in housing in a lot of situations, and you know, or either that or we were past its original intended use. So, you know, again, demographically speaking, we used to be in a scenario in which, you know, the average size household was 3 to 5 people, depending on kind of what point in time you're looking at. We're at a point now where it's more like 1.8 to 2.2 people per household. It means we're overhoused, you know, and I don't think that is wholly appreciated, because we've also kind of we've also pursued this value of just kind of luxury and space and increasing your wealth. But the truth is, there is a lot of vacant space, both with respect to the kind of available land that, you know, are in either private interests, crown land, or otherwise. There's vacant land out there. And there's also a lot of space in existing facilities that just isn't underutilized. And you know, again, I accept that it's a tough pill for some people to swallow, to kind of give up some of that luxury. But I think, you know, again, as far as kind of the values that we want to pursue as a society, and we're facing the fact that there's over 1,000 people who are homeless in Halifax right now, tens of thousands of others who are struggling to kind of maintain the housing they have, we need to start contemplating the best use of that space. And so I think that there's a kind of a moral responsibility. I also think that there's a kind of a practical economic responsibility, because as those household sizes have decreased, it also often means that the people living in them are getting older. They may be on a fixed income. They may need more supports. And so to start kind of integrating housing from a kind of multi-generational level, or even just bringing in renters into a home, it can benefit somebody economically. It can give them social outlets, and it can kind of give them kind of a internal support mechanism that they just might not otherwise have. So there's no doubt there's compromises involved, but I think we underappreciate the benefits, and not just the immediate benefits, but the long-term benefits. Again, that kind of that muscle memory that we will develop over time through living together, working together, sharing resources. That's a skill set. That is a kind of an understanding that I think is essential to a lot of the challenges in front of us, housing or otherwise. And so I think there's going to be a lot of learning and understanding that we can't even put our finger on right now, but it will kind of expose itself as we kind of pursue that opportunity. I tend to think that the most significant reason, the fundamental reason, is that we haven't had to. I mean, to me, as much as I believe in this approach to housing from a moral and values perspective, I tend to think that it really is a product of necessity. We just haven't really had to across, like a big enough proportion of the population. It just hasn't been a need that we've needed to kind of accommodate. I think things are changing. It's rapidly changing. Canada, Nova Scotia, we have been in an extremely privileged position for a very long time. We've had the luxury of, creating these independent lives, and, that comes with benefits, it comes with consequences. But it's time to consider an alternative. It's necessary that we start considering alternatives. I think people just need to open their minds to these new possibilities. Again, it's not something you're ever going to force on anybody. I think it's going to happen kind of incrementally, but we do need to get to the point where we are kind of understand the opportunity. We might kind of create some support systems that go along with those new ways of living to give people the confidence to kind of take the leap. And I think once some people take the leap, they'll prove the model to others, and you'll start seeing it gain traction. This is the way these things always go. There's rarely ever, in a kind of free and democratic society, a wholesale shift as far as kind of lifestyles are concerned. It's something that takes time. Some people are ahead of the curve, and others kind of catch up along the way. But I do think that there is a certain percentage of the population that will either see the benefits from kind of a personal perspective, just it's a lifestyle that they are interested in and gravitate to. For others, it'll be a matter of necessity. But even in those circumstances, I think people who simply can't afford an alternative and find themselves in a co-housing or community land trust situation, may start to realize there's more there than they might have given the model credit for. So I tend to think that that's the way it's going to move. I guess for a period of time anyway, my household was a multi-generational household. My mother-in-law lived with us, and I don't know that any of us thought too much about it at the time. I guess to an extent it was a necessity. It wasn't anything that we kind of resisted, but we all understood that that was the best scenario for everybody involved. And I do think that it really had its benefits, for us as a family. It gave my kids a closer connection to their grandmother. She had kind of a social outlet, which she wouldn't have otherwise had. It certainly helped in terms of, just sharing the costs of living, which, were a struggle for us at a time. So, this, I think, needs to be kind of understood. I think that um, in most cultures over most of human history, this is the way we worked, right? Like we shared that space, and it's still certainly far more prevalent in African Nova Scotian community, in the Indigenous community, in newcomer communities in Canada. That idea of living together, sharing space across generations, and even kind of outside of a family group is it's common. It's very common, and it works. It works for those communities that kind of understand the implications. They accept the responsibilities inherent to it, and I don't hear, or at least I just don't see it is understood as a compromise. I think that there's just a lot of benefits to it. I think for most of us, it's worth just looking kind of around at those the people that are important to us, and to question whether or not they're in as supportive and as kind of strong a position as they could be. If not, I think it's worth considering whether or not there's a situation where you could again share that space and share in the responsibilities. I think that there's just growing numbers of people out there in the world who are struggling to get by on their own, and that could be adult children who just can't find a place either in the job market or in the housing market. And I guess they're living in some sort of informal way with their parents. I tend to think that we could maybe accommodate that situation a little bit better if we thought about it carefully, right? Similarly, aging parents. I think that there's situations in which it would be better for the family. It would be better in terms of the service and care that that individual gets. It would be better from the point of view of the cost to society and the healthcare system overall. I mean, I feel like we're taking on a lot of costs as a society and getting really poor results by again kind of leaving that service and the supports to a kind of a professional system of care that really can't fulfill the full mission, right? They can kind of go through some basic service requirements, but there's a piece that's missing, right? The kind of love and care and that sense of uncompromising responsibility that family members can provide. I think, we have a lot of opportunity to do better by each other, as long as, again, we start kind of confronting the issues and we start kind of putting the resources that we all have at our disposal, or many of us have at our disposal, put them to work for those who need them. And I do think that there's kind of a reciprocal benefit. Yeah. There's some new organizations out there that are trying to kind of address this issue, right? It's certainly a daunting proposition for somebody to kind of take on a stranger into their home, as a cohabitant. And Happy Pad, for example, right, is trying to kind of set up that system of accountability, right? How do you kind of get to know that person ahead of time, have some choice into who it is, and make sure that there's somebody that you're going to get along with, share some interests in, have similar lifestyles. So I do think that there's systems that are in development to kind of explore solutions to those components. Again, I tend to think that the better solution over time is a more integrated, understanding community in which those kind of relationships occur more organically, right? I think that those new services are there because we've lost connection with each other to the extent that we don't even know who to reach out to, where the opportunity might exist, how to kind of facilitate and accommodate that kind of transition in lifestyle. I think that you put these systems into place, and sooner or later, the opportunities start presenting themselves because it's understood as an opportunity. It's understood as an acceptable lifestyle. It's understood that that people are looking for these opportunities and are willing to kind of take them on. I think that what goes along with that is an accountability measure. I think the more connected we are, the more interdependent we are, the more people are accountable to their behaviors. We're not acting as anonymous parties anymore. We understand that we have a role, a place, and a responsibility in the community, and I think there'll be more. We'll be able to rely on people following through on that to a greater degree. I think that this is a big part of the challenge right now, is that we've kind of told everybody that they're independent actors and don't really have a responsibility to their neighbors. I think that's a self-fulfilling proposition, right? Like, somebody behaves as an independent actor, and people see them as somebody that they can't necessarily rely on because they're pursuing their own interests. It doesn't lend itself to the types of systems that we're talking about. It's going to take time to kind of rebuild that trust, that understanding, and those relationships to the extent that these things really appear feasible to people. But I don't think it's an impossible feat, and I think it's probably a lot simpler than we make it out to be right now. I think we just have to start, taking steps in that direction, and follow the path that kind of presents itself in front of us as we move forward. First and foremost, I'm a believer in the fact and in the idea that we all do what we know, right? I mean, if you meet a doctor, chances are one of their parents or somebody close to them was a doctor, right? Like, I mean, we do things that we know, we understand, and we feel comfortable with. My dad was an engineer, and my mother was a nurse. And so I tend to think that the intersecting point there has something to do with housing with a social purpose. Housing and service related to housing. It's been a meandering path, no doubt about it. Background in kind of sociology and the arts, master's degree in urban planning, and worked in group homes and homeless shelters and built houses and managed property and like everything in between over time. So certainly not somebody who had a kind of a clear notion of a career path for myself. Followed my interests, but also stuck to my principles. When it comes down to it, if you've got certain beliefs around environment and economic equality, there's probably about 98% of jobs out there that really don't qualify, that aren't something that I would feel kind of happy and content with doing. So, it was in some sense, I think, kind of my upbringing, and in another sense, a process of what's the expression? A process of elimination. Just knowing that this, and this were just not options for me, and so ended up kind of in the nonprofit world.